Yeah, that's great. Okay, and we're live. Hi, everybody. Glad you could join us for this webinar about generative AI and its impact on education and training. My name is Richard Tromans. I'm the founder of Artificial Lawyer, and with us is a fantastic panel to talk about the subject. But first, a little bit of an intro. Generative AI really hit the headlines in the legal world about 2 years ago, around November 2022. Now, things have changed a lot. A lot of law firms are using it. Some law firms are using it at scale. For some law firms, it's really making a real substantive difference. For others, they're still toying with it. In-house lawyers are using it as well at scale. And there's a third element to this, which is education, university and training inside law firms. And that's what we're going to focus on today. And there are many, many different angles to look at it from. But to tell us more about it is our panel. And to kick us off, Megan, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. My name is Megan. I'm the Associate Director at the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics, or we call it Codex. My background is in law and linguistics, and my kind of interest for the past year has been this question about how do you actually integrate generative AI into legal education, particularly as we're trying to pivot away from, volume as the primary tool for training our lawyers. What happens, when you take away reaching a certain amount of contracts and using that to unlock wisdom? How do you actually build the next generation of legal experts? So really happy to be here.
Fantastic, fantastic. Vaclav?
Hello, everyone. My name is Václav Janeček. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Bristol Law School in England. I'm also the program director of our master's program in law innovation technology, where I run a digital technology and legal practice course. So as part of that course, we are actually doing also some hands-on and also theoretical exercises regarding generative AI in legal practice. And outside of Bristol, I also co-direct the Oxford Law Tech Education program, which aims at training those already in practice. And so that's a fully interdisciplinary endeavor, lawyers and computer scientists working together.
Fantastic, fantastic. And Jeffrey, quick introduction, please.
Brett, are you able to hear me?
Yep, you're coming across clearly.
Excellent. So I'm Jeffrey Adnick. I am the Director of Marketing for U.S. Legal Markets with LexisNexis. I've worked with the company for about 20 years. Most of that time spent in law schools and working with law schools to train them to use, whether it be Lexis products or Lexis AI now. And I also work a lot with law firms, and I spent a lot of time with law firms in the last year getting their training up and running as well. So I have a lot of insights around those.
All right, fantastic. Excellent. As I think you'll agree, we've got a great panel who are well fitted to the subject. So let's get like a baseline. Let's kind of like set a sort of shared reality here. Megan, I mean, how significant is generative AI here in relation to training and education? I mean, what are you seeing and what's the feedback? Just generally, I mean, should everyone be taking this as seriously as we are?
I absolutely think so. And I think there's obviously many descriptions of what is training. Is it, upskilling when it comes to getting more familiar with the technology itself, or more of what I have been doing recently, which is leveraging actually generative AI in order to hone your legal skills. And I think in either case, it's incredibly important because I think it's clear that not only law firms, but also from a general, broader kind of standpoint, there is massive adoption. Whether or not it is consistent and sustainable adoption is a different question. But I think at this stage, it's clear that there's a legal tech renaissance that is happening. And a lot of these tools that leverage these models are being directly integrated into all different types of platforms. And so the exposure is going to be inevitable. So I think from just every angle, it's incredibly important for students and continuing training for lawyers to be familiar with the technology and use it in some way to kind of better their own sort of familiarity with the subject matter.
Absolutely. I love the term legal tech renaissance. I think I wrote a story a few years ago about a legal tech renaissance, but I was obviously jumping the gun. I was a little bit early by a few years, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, generative AI from my perspective, there was that first wave of AI and automation, and then there was a whole bunch of other things happening, but now generative AI has really ramped things up. the adoption is just so much broader. So absolutely. Vaclav, what are you seeing? What's the kind of feedback you're getting from the faculty, from the students, from the firms?
Yeah.
Is this for real?
I would absolutely echo what Megan says there, and I think the demand is coming from the students certainly. And it's cool. Everyone wants to use it, try it out, and it also comes from the colleagues. But I think the real difficulty here comes with one, licensing. So with my university hat on, it's actually quite difficult to get hold of the best tools out there for the legal sector specifically. So the typical situation in a university, at least in Europe, would be, okay, you have the Copilot, which is part of the Microsoft Office package, but that only can do so much. And the other is professional ethics. And now I mean student professional ethics, but also then going forward. So how to be transparent about using this correctly. And I think we're going to discuss some of these questions further down the line, but I really want to raise these two, licensing and professional ethics, as a big debating points we have, regardless of the massive demand which is out there.
Yeah, and we will definitely come back. And it's a very good point, which I hadn't thought about, which is true. I mean, you can't teach the students about legal tech if you're not allowed to show them the legal tech tools. You can't just use PowerPoint, can you? Jeff, obviously you're at LexisNexis, but generally, what have you seen?
Yeah, I think that Megan and Vaclav are spot on. And what I've seen is, because I have a unique position where I work with firms and schools, and a lot of times the schools don't always pick up what the firms are doing. They just keep teaching what they normally teach, right? This is a situation where that is not happening. You're talking about, this is in every school in or every accredited U.S. law school right now already. 70% of these schools are unrestricted with their students. 30% have mild restrictions around first-year students. But what's really interesting for me is what the firms are doing, because you get it in the firms, and the firms typically will adopt technology and not necessarily adopt it very well. They're adopting it very well, the firms that are taking this on. And one of the big questions that always comes up is, why are you adopting it? It's not just to save time. It is to have higher quality work product. And this is why schools are really also adopting it, right? Is they want their students to come out with the skills to do the higher quality work product. So I think we can certainly dig into that more as we go through this. But I mean, I think it's a really interesting dynamic that we're finally seeing schools paying attention to firms.
So so yeah, please, Megan. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to jump in with a quick anecdote, because Vaclav, what he said really reminded me of this. So we recently had an event called Meet Codex, where we bring all our students in to get to know our research center better. And actually, a student had raised their hand and said, "Are we going to get more classes on Gen AI and law?" And we were kind of like a little bit gobsmacked, because we were trying really hard to share, trying to see if there was uptake, but instead it was coming directly from the students. So 100% echo what Vaclav was saying. And I think internally with the faculty, we started to experiment with other tools like Notebook LM, for example. It got its viral moment, and it turns out that, no surprise, faculty likes to hear their own papers recited to them in a different way. And so, yeah, there's a lot of interest, I think, that's really booming.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Okay, so I think we've set the baseline. This is for real. Anyone who's tuning in who's like, well, yeah, this is just like blockchain. It's not going to make much difference. Truth is, it really is making a difference. And I mean, we just finished the Legal Innovators Conference in London, 2 days. I think about a third, probably a third of the in-house lawyers were really using generative AI. Probably nearly every single law firm was using generative AI in some shape or form across a broad spectrum. But generally, yes, it's embedding, and clearly it's coming from the students, and it's coming from the firms. So let's get into this now. So there are 3 key parts to this, I think. There's, how do you train the lawyers of the future to operate in a world where generative AI is going to be very much part of their practice? How will the students be taught internally within law schools, within universities, when generative AI is something that perhaps all of their colleagues and their peers are using for education, writing papers and so forth? And what do we actually need to teach them? Do you need to teach people to add up when you have calculators? That side of things. And then I think the third piece is, how do we use AI itself to actually train lawyers, and which is obviously Megan's key area, which is, how do we build simulators, for example, which is, I'm really excited to hear what Megan's going to say on this. So let's start with part one, which you might say is the best starting point, which is how do we prepare the lawyers of tomorrow for a world where generative AI is going to be a core part of how they produce work? How do we do that, Megan?
Yeah, so for us at least, we started to think about almost like some of the setbacks that I've historically seen, for example, in the way that we've trained other tools. So I remember back in the day that it wasn't a core part of a lot of the curriculum in legal education. So at law schools, like, you might get some interaction when you do the legal research and writing class, but for the most part, you actually had to knock on the doors of law librarians to be able to get a sense of how to use the different platforms and the tools. And I think on the other hand, it's pretty important now seeing that we have boot camps. We also have other ways in which we're actually seeing the main courses find integration. And so, for example, we hear from some of the faculty where they're directly using it for weekly office hours or something like that to help triage some early questions for students. And you're finding, sort of like I suggested with Notebook LM, like we find that it's a really interesting tool to help students interact with the material differently. And so I think all of these...
Actually, Megan, just let me stop you there. Before we go any further, can you just, for people who haven't played with Notebook LM, can you explain what it is and what it does?
Yeah, sure. Essentially, I think the flagship product and what it does is that you can drop in any link, body of text, etc., and essentially turns that text into a podcast. You can digest it in different ways. The more traditional way where you can summarize it, draw key insights. But I think the big sort of kicker here, and what was really attractive for many of, I think, the Gen Z or current young folks, is that it sounds like very believable podcast. So you'll have two people and they even have those pauses and interesting intonations and things like that. And so you're seeing kind of very much digesting material in a whole new fashion. And I think a lot of the younger generations are finding that audio is a much more interesting and interactive way to engage with legal material. In the past, you were imagining, for example, like, I had to kind of read through and kind of visualize some of the cases. One thing that we've experimented with is what if we, threw actually seminal cases into something like Runway ML, so text to video generation. And actually you can play out what that case looks like so that students could visualize what those cases and how they were. So Notebook LM is different. It's, again, interacting with the audio side. So yeah, I think going back to the main question, for us, we started doing very practical workshops to try to get students to actually learn how to build and use these tools. For example, the past past boot camp that we ran, we actually invited OpenAI and they actually did a whole tutorial to kind of walk step by step to the students on what are different prompt techniques, what is even fine tuning, what is RAG, all of these sort of standard terms that you're hearing all around, whether or not, the level of sophistication that law students need is to the RAG or fine-tuning level, but they still have a familiarity with the terminology.
Yeah, wow, there's a lot to unpack then. And someone just asked, what is the software? And it's called Notebook LM. And who produces that?
Google.
It's by Google. And to anyone listening, we'll be doing 15 minutes, hopefully, of questions at the end. But you please feel free to ping your questions as we go through. But there'll be a whole bunch of questions at the end. So Vaclav, I mean, it's a really interesting question about prompting. I mean, we can break all these different things down. So first of all, do you have to sort of teach legal AI fundamentals to the students so they understand, or do they know this already because they're using all these tools in their own personal lives? Do you need to teach them how to prompt? Is legal prompting going to be different to the prompting that they're doing perhaps in their personal lives as well? Maybe just talk us just through that a little bit. I mean, do you have to teach them, or do they already know this?
Okay. So one thing I should state up front here is that I'm more involved in the postgraduate level teaching. I do have lots of opinions on the undergrad level teaching, but But generally, I think, so what Megan has mentioned there with regards to accessing law librarians to learn what tools are out there, how to use them, etc., that I think is largely a matter for the undergraduate curriculum, at least in the UK, where you have a specialized law undergraduate degree already. And there you learn some basic prompting techniques, and that I would imagine be more hands-on. And we actually do have some kind of these activities as part of our curriculum here in Bristol. But then for most students, and there are actually quite a lot of law professionals who've done their master's degree, and that would be their route to qualifying as a lawyer. And so I'm thinking largely about these master level students when I say that I think what the law schools / law universities should do here is just help them to understand the technology, understand the compliance liability issues, the business models behind, and not necessarily how exactly to use it, right? So the analogy I like to use here is I don't want to teach my students how to write a great formula in Excel or how to write a great rule in Outlook. I just want them to know for themselves, to recognize why something is a great Excel formula or why something is a great prompt. And so on that account, these master students we have on our specialist LLM in law, innovation, and technology. This is LLM masters in law, not large language model.
Large language model. Yeah.
So on this program, the students, even though they are super keen and interested in this area already, when we give them a tech focus primer on the basis of what the technology is about, how it works, they don't know. They don't really know, and they are not even aware of so many tools which are out there. So to your question, Richard, if they come with this knowledge, no, they don't. It's actually, there is as far as I can see, still a huge gulf in between students coming from the pre-university education and university education, and then people who are already in the sector and who get their hands on some of these tools.
Right. Okay. Very important point. So the students, even though they may be up to date with, say, ChatGPT, they're not necessarily going to be good at prompting, I guess, because you don't need very, very complex prompts with ChatGPT, and they certainly don't have knowledge of the legal tech tools, because I guess in normal life they will not have had exposure to those.
Yeah.
I mean, Jeffrey, I mean, you're talking to the law schools and the law firms. I mean, what's the level of knowledge that people have coming in?
Yeah, what I think is really interesting here is that this is a rare instance where the newer lawyers and students who are coming into the firms know more. Specifically, when you talk about prompting, for example, we've heard many examples of summer associates coming into a firm and teaching more senior attorneys, this is how you use this tool, this is how you write a prompt. And you can't just ask it a Google search. You have to give the prompt specifics. So I still think the education of AI falls into three categories. The first we've talked about already, prompting, right? I mean, you have to teach people how to do prompting. It's not the same thing, whether it's a brand new student, whether it's a senior partner in a law firm, you've got to teach them to do prompting. And so when we released back in October, we released like 6 videos because we found that students wanted to learn through video on the fundamentals of just prompting. We didn't even talk about product at all. We just said, if you're going to do a prompt in any AI, this is how you do it. I think you also have to educate about the use cases for an AI. Certain AIs do certain things well, certain AIs don't. And so they have to understand these are the use cases that work when you're using a legal AI versus the use cases that you're using when you're using ChatGPT. And why? Because of grounding, things like that. And so they have to understand when you're using a ChatGPT versus a legal AI, the legal AI is going to be grounded in legal content. So you're going to get answers that make sense to you as a lawyer. And you're not going to worry about hallucinations and things like that. And then the last thing that I think needs to be taught is checking your work, right? This is the one thing, like we saw it at the very beginning of this revolution, people didn't check their work and they handed stuff in the courts, and we know what happened there, right? I mean, they handed in cases that didn't exist. So you always have to check your work, regardless of whether it's grounded or not. So I think those 3 areas, prompting, use cases, and checking, those are the things that have to be done in any education of AI.
Gotcha. And it's a key point, and we often gloss over it, which is that an LLM cannot know what it has not been trained on. And one anecdote I saw a while ago was someone was talking about how, let's say GPT-4, because it's read so much, it's absorbed so much information from the internet, you could ask it about the US rules on taking a holiday as an employee. But Bob Smith, Mary Jones, whatever, if you then asked GPT-4, how many days holiday have I got left at my company, it could not answer that. It is impossible because it is not connected to your company's database. It does not have a record of your holidays. And I think people, because it's so impressive on the general answers, people forget that it cannot, unless it's been connected to the correct database and you have the whole RAG set up behind it to make it correct, then you cannot answer those questions. So yeah, these are some really key points. So yeah, it sounds like we need elementary education on prompting, how LLMs work, and also accuracy. Jeff, you talked about, we've kind of addressed accuracy, but I mean, to some degree, I think it's probably fair to say there's room for improvement.
I would agree with that, and I would say the attorneys that I talked to, it was so striking to me when this first all happened, and we were talking to attorneys a year ago about how they would come right out and say it's just another tool, and it's not a substitute for my judgment, right? I'm still the attorney, and I have to check that work. So when it spits something out to me, I cannot just say, "Oh, this looks great. I'm gonna turn it in, or I'm gonna file it in court." They're like, as an attorney, it is just my duty. It is my ethical responsibility to check that, and that's something that's really important with this too. Is all the ethical rules that go along with this that are just like in the process of being developed right now. So I think that's another important point. The checking is just key.
Yeah, well, Vaclav, and you mentioned that earlier, the ethics. Do you want to just come back on that? Generally, obviously, there are ethical, I would like to say there are ethical rules, but at present, as far as I understand, at least in England and Wales, there are no fixed rules from the SRA. I don't know what the situation is in America. Vaclav, I mean, what ethical considerations are you getting people to think about?
So there are a number of those. So just coming back on the point of regulation, the Legal Services Act has this duty of independence or principle of independence, right? And that's what we teach the students as well, to understand that they are legally bound to provide the service independently, and so just can't rely on any content generated by any tool out there. But that's the point. Many of these ethical questions around how to use and whether to declare the use, etc., comes down to the question of, okay, so what it is that you are using it for. And if it is content generation, so then the independent thing to do, at least that's how we teach it in Bristol, the independent thing to do is to use it where you already know the output, or where you can validate the output, right? And so that again raises the big question, okay, so do we just teach the students how to use the tool? Or do we first need to teach them what they should expect from the correct output or valuable output to be? And so I would draw a really big line here between the content generation, which is probably what Jeffrey had in mind when we are talking about drafting some briefs, etc., when lawyers need to validate the content. But there are so many other use cases regarding the optimization of work and just translation of something that you have, summarization, etc., where these are really good use cases. And I think these are also important for the students to know about and have this at their disposal.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, there's a question there about how should the law professors themselves, if they don't know all of this, and why should they? They didn't become law professors because they wanted to understand generative AI. How do the law professors themselves learn all of this? Which is a very good question. Megan, just a quick word on that, and then we're going to move to the next part of the webinar. But how can people who are in positions of authority, and they're looking at this and thinking, great, yes, but I don't actually understand the subject myself?
Yeah, I think often when we're seeing like prompting, one of the, I think, biggest misconception, so to speak, is to treat this like this is entirely new. I think part of what prompting is and what it teases us to do is to get very specific. And lawyers have always been pretty specific. It's just we're used to communicating with one another at a level of abstraction where we already assume certain types of knowledge. If, we're talking to law students and we're talking to kind of sort of the naive user, so to speak, we start paring down how we want to articulate legal concepts and how we want to kind of structure really complicated legal constructs. And in that case, that's exactly how you should be prompting. In the sense, like, you're sort of imagining the way that you teach 1Ls or the way that you teach, folks that are new to law, get to a level of specificity, get to that level of granularity. And I think the other side that we should think about is most lawyers might not get to a point of being necessarily power users. And you might not actually just open up ChatGPT every time. A lot of platform tools like LexisNexis or Thomson Reuters, they already kind of on the back end do the prompting work for you.
True,
in many cases, like, they already kind of have great starting points. And so the question is I think we forget that we are our own experts. And so what we should be doing is thinking about it as if we're teaching the machine what they should know about us and how we think and how we are doing things. And then naturally, we already have good prompting techniques. And I always say, until you open up the platform, open up the window, whatever model you want to use, you won't realize what the limitations are. And so I think there are multiple ways in which you can engage with prompting. But in short, I say that lean on your own expertise and figure out ways to be clearer and more succinct and more granular. And that's how you get to good prompting.
Fantastic. Yeah. And maybe I could just summarize that without using ChatGPT and say, if you can teach, you can prompt. Because teaching, I used to be a teacher two or three lifetimes ago. It is about, as you say, Megan, it's about boiling it down to a clear message, a clear set of instructions with a context that the other person can understand and can engage with. Absolutely. Let's kind of move on now. There's a lot there, so much to unpack, and perhaps we can go back to the questions on that. Let's just talk just generally, and then we're going to get into the use of AI in simulations and so forth. But just generally, will teaching have to change? I know you touched on this a little bit already, Megan. I mean, and this doesn't necessarily just have to be for law, but just generally at university, postgraduate level, and training inside law firms. Will all of this just have to change now because of the nature of generative AI? It's just, we can't carry on just saying, here's a book, read it. In 2 weeks, there's an exam. If you fail your exam, you're a bad student. That's just not going to be, that's not functional anymore.
I certainly think that at least in 1L, you get the assumption that there's a lot of memorization involved. And part of the memorization is actually just building muscle for you to think like a lawyer. And I think ultimately these tools are getting you to that place faster. And so some of the areas that we're working on, right, is how do you create muscle memory without doing things in repetition, so to speak, or purely consuming by one dimension, so just by reading. What are some other interactive ways? And I always say, and you tease this a little bit, but pilots have simulators, surgeons have simulations on how to go through that surgery. Why can't lawyers have the same? And so a lot of what we're working on is trying to work with industry experts, senior partners, and co-creating basically using their own war stories and their experiences to help young students and young associates preview in advance some of the curveballs that can come your way and start learning how to react to those. And
we'll come back to that in more detail in a moment. But I think that the key point you're saying is we don't have to just digest textbooks. We can get more experiential. And that's where the real value is.
Absolutely.
But I suppose, well, let's pass this to Vaclav. Now we get to, when I was coming through school, there was a big debate, because I did pure maths and statistics, amongst other things. And there was a big debate about, should we be allowed to use scientific calculators, which were just becoming quite popular back in the 1900s when I went through school. And, are we at the same kind of situation again? I mean, do we just say, you don't need to read all these textbooks, just focus on the stuff that's really going to matter to you, like being good at client service, being able to strategize legally? I mean, are we going to have to start teaching different things?
Yeah, so my short answer here would be no, actually. I don't think there is such a big change coming on us as a result of generative AI. So there are serious challenges for law schools and for university education more generally that have been prompted by generative AI. And that comes down to, for instance, our ability to test. But the question here is, so obviously we are grades awarding institutions, and so you need to test so that you can award the degree to someone, and that is an important societal signaling mechanism, and also important for employment prospects. And I myself, if I wanted to team up with someone to build the next law tech product, I would also want to have their credentials, and so the university degree is an important part of that. But what it is that we are testing, right? And so the current methods of testing, they are amenable to problems associated with generative AI because students can easily pass on the content produced by generative AI, and we do not have clear ways how to distinguish that. So any plagiarism checks or AI detection tools simply do not work. And so what I see is that the universities are now in a point of crisis, perhaps, reflecting about themselves what it is that we are teaching the students and what it is that we are testing in the students during the exams. So from within a university life, it just happens so that you keep designing a course and keep testing the thing all over and over, and you do not have so much time to really take a step back and rethink the whole education. And so we are just seeing some small iterative changes here and there. My approach personally is that I am keen for my students to use Gen AI in their assignments, but I'm very express about how they should do that and how they should transparently declare that they have been using Gen AI and how they have been using Gen AI, so that I can test that aspect of
so just to clarify for everyone listening, so you say to the students, go ahead, use ChatGPT, you can use it for writing your essays and so forth, but you've got to be transparent about it.
That's in a nutshell. More specifically, I'm asking them to use it for summarization, or I'm allowing them to use it for summarization. And where they do so then there are some further specific rules around that. But again, the headline message here from me would be, what probably will be changing is the aspect which we are testing, and there will be more emphasis on critical thinking. And so that is something that just doesn't change. That's something that still comes from universities. And there are so many different ways of being a lawyer that I think this part of the university education, law school education, just will remain the same.
Although to be devil's advocate, one of the things I've seen, particularly people at partner level, is that they're not using AI for the simple stuff, like, hey, help me review this NDA. They're actually asking the AI really complex theoretical and philosophical questions about the matters they face. So it's almost like they're outsourcing the difficult stuff, and they're not actually doing what I would regard as the commoditized, industrialized bit. But anyway, Jeffrey, and then we'll just go back to Megan. Actually, Jeffrey, before we do that, Megan, just in a sentence, are you allowing your students, if you have students yourself, to use AI to do their work?
Oh, 100%. In fact, actually, part of what I'm interested in is a lot of this human-machine comparison. And so a lot of what we're hoping to do is say, like, hey, this is, say, an essay question that you have to answer. You draft it however you like. And then I want to see a version of it where you actually asked ChatGPT to do the full thing for you. And then I want to kind of compare in a way, if you draw in bits and pieces what you liked and didn't like, how did you actually improve the quality of it when you merged the two? And I think that a lot of this kind of baseline work almost kind of showcases the value and ultimately, creative ways in which the students can use these tools.
Gotcha. Interesting. Jeff, what are you hearing from both the law firms? Well, actually, no, let's just focus on the students. We'll come back to the law firms in a minute. From the law school side, are you, particularly in the US, what kind of support for using AI in the classroom are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it's high. I had references at the beginning where, this is in 100% of US accredited law schools right now. 70% of them, no restrictions at all on students use it. It's part of the curriculum. in the 30% that it's not, it's usually being restricted by first-year students, who are learning the fundamentals of research. They don't want, and there's actually a question out there about how do you deal with the the research skills, or the decrease of research skills because of this. Well, I mean, this is potentially a solution. I don't know that it's a good one to restrict it, but you do have restrictions there. But I don't think that this changes the fundamentals of law school at all. And fundamentals, like Megan said, you are going there to learn how to think like a lawyer. If anything, I think it enhances your ability to learn those fundamentals, specifically because you get to focus more on the analysis piece of law school than the research piece. And yes, you need to learn research skills. There's no question, because you have to check your work. But checking your work is also checking the words that are said and how the connections are made between the arguments and the case citations, and if the citations are real or not. Do you know how to go do that? So I think the fundamentals of law schools are intact. And I think, if anything, Gen AI is just going to improve the quality of student coming out because of that.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're right. I hope you're right. Although maybe, who knows? I mean, in 10 years, when we've got really extraordinarily good reasoning capabilities based on an LLM, even some of those more esoteric parts of learning will be doable by Gen AI. I mean, are we like teaching mathematics by saying to to a MIT, a student, I want you to add up 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus, and that's how we're going to teach you mathematics. And they're like, I can just use a calculator or my Excel spreadsheet. And what I really want you to tell me about is something that I literally cannot learn, even using AI or any type of technology. It's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, are some aspects of university just going to become redundant? Just like, these things which we've been teaching for centuries are just cut to the chase.
I mean, one thing I find kind of fascinating is a lot of people complain about law school as being theoretical, and then kind of what you learn in law school, there's a gap between what happens in practice. And I think part of that gap is owed to the fact that you're dealing with a lot of drudgery and grunt work in the early years as an associate. And yes, it's kind of in part because you need to, again, build that muscle memory, and those are your training wheels. But what was really exciting for many law students is, again, this thinking like a lawyer that everyone else has mentioned, this critical thinking, and you eventually arrive there. And isn't that great if you're able to sort of, make that transition much more rapid, and you kind of bridge that gap faster? And or like, even if you're doing some grunt work, you have much more clarity in why you need to do that. And so, like, this is kind of quirky, but I've been rewatching some episodes of House, and the whole department is about like very complicated rare diseases that they have to diagnose. And in the same way, there's all this complexity that is out there, and there's going to be more complexity with new tools and other kind of unforeseen circumstances. Being able to kind of see that and understand why you had to build those fundamentals, I think that's what makes law school much more powerful, actually. And so generative AI is able to kind of get young law students and young lawyers up to speed, I think, a lot quicker.
Gotcha. So it sounds like the recipe is take time with the fundamentals, get those fundamentals, even if it's very slow, get those fundamentals sorted out, and then zip through as fast as you can to get into the theoretical stuff. But let's miss out that middle boring bit, because it's really not beneficial to spend that much time there, except around understanding the skills of research, as Vaclav said and others. Interesting. Let's just go on to, amazingly, we're zooming through this already. So let's get into using AI itself to run simulators. And then we're going to look at some of the broader questions around, for example, what do you do with the first year associate in a law firm who generally gets given the lowest level work, which is in some ways where they get trained on the job, but we'll come to that in a second. So Megan, this is your speciality. Why and how can we use AI itself to actually train the lawyers?
Yeah, so not too long ago, we started thinking about this question. And in particular, we've been working very closely with some M&A partners. They have 40 years of experience. And many of them said that there's a lot of these bits and pieces that you gain just after doing enough negotiations, you kind of get a sense of what the opposing counsel, where they're headed. And I think another component is that there's other soft skills, so to speak, where you want to understand actually from the client when we say we want to make sure that we're meeting clients' expectations. What does that necessarily mean, right? Like, how do you actually draw out what our client needs and what our client expectations? All of those things, I think you continue to learn on the job over time. And so we want to do that at kind of a low stakes version. So what we've built was this M&A negotiation simulator, which basically prior to signing a letter of intent, which for those in the audience that aren't, M&A specialists, it's basically the point where the seller could lose a lot of their leverage. And so we wanted to do a negotiation where it plays much more on strategy, much more on trying to understand that industry nuance. And so basically the whole simulator plays on different modules. As a junior, what are you looking for when you're negotiating, say, the representations and warranties? As a senior associate, you're kind of you're demanded, for example, to react to curveballs and know how to kind of pivot in certain unforeseen circumstances. And then as a partner, if the deal is about to fall apart, that's where you are supposed to shine and know how to maneuver. And so all these modules, you have one basic theme, one essential sort of fact pattern, and then increasing nuclear and different sort of like modes that you play on to kind of depend on how reactive you have to be. And essentially kind of that's what we're seeing, at least from an experience standpoint, is you've dealt with enough battles, and that's how you really like start doing that really complicated work. And we did the same thing with the negotiation simulator.
Fantastic. And that segues really nicely into this next point that I just highlighted, which is I'm not quite sure how it works so much in the US, but in the UK, certainly the first 2 years when you're a trainee, effectively the law firm is getting the junior lawyer to work, paid work, billable work on the hour. That work is paid for by the clients, but you're learning. You're the bottom of that leverage pyramid of work. And it's a great system because the junior lawyers do the more elementary work. They learn, they get paid to do it. So everybody's happy. Well, at least the law firms are happy. And, and also to some degree, the clients are also happy because they're getting the lowest possible charge out rate in the whole firm because they're the most junior lawyers. Introduce AI, and where a lot of the most basic work, whether if not now, but certainly in the years to come, is going to steadily be absorbed by this technology. Now we have a economic problem, not just an educational problem. You've got a sort of economic and an educational problem combined, which is that if you're using the first couple of years to train junior lawyers, and I'm sure that's very similar in the US, what do you do if you're a law firm? Because work that you would give, that you would feed them to get training, which would generate money for you, you can't give them anymore. And you don't want them just hanging around the office, not generating any income whilst on these gigantic salaries. That's not going to work. So, Jeffrey, as you're in the US, I just want to particularly what you thought. I mean, we're not there yet. We're certainly not there yet. The impacts of Gen AI is not big enough yet, but I do think we'll get there fairly rapidly. I think where this model of using early years education and work simultaneously starts to break down a bit. I mean, what do you think is going to happen in the US?
I was actually on with a firm about a week ago, and we were talking about this very thing, right? Is what happens to the junior associates, and they were fairly optimistic about it. And what they thought was just like what I had said about law schools, that it's going to kind of raise the level of law schools and higher quality students come out, that they may bring in less associates, but they're going to be able to focus more on moving these associates along quicker, especially with things like what Megan was talking about with simulations, and get them to a place where they can do higher level strategic work quicker, right? Because the question that I asked them when we were on that call, because they're like, this thing saves us all kinds of time. We don't have to review depots anymore. And then they have all these examples. And I said, well, what do you do at that time? Right? If you're saving time, what are you doing with that time? Right? And the question that begged was, are you billing less? And they are not. And the answer was no, we are not billing less. What we are doing is spending a lot more time on the higher level functions of a law firm to ensure that the product that we hand back to the client is of its highest quality. And so it becomes this quality decision, right? Are you willing to, or do you want to have a higher quality result? And can you do that through Gen AI? And I think the answer to that is yes.
It's an interesting one as well, though, isn't it? Because I mean, that some law firms, without mentioning any names, we know who are doing an enormous amount of high value, super, cutting edge, this type of contract has never been done in the history of mankind kind of thing. And then there's other firms which are literally working off templates, which every couple of years get updated. May not be nice to say, but it's true. This is going to change things differently for different firms. Some firms might be able to accelerate learning. Let's say if you're in Manhattan and you only work on the most complex futures contracts, you can accelerate the learning of the young lawyers coming through on that and get them to do higher value stuff. And in fact, you might help the firm because you can actually take on more volume now. You can take on more of this work. If you're doing different work, if you're doing work that's already commoditized, where do these lawyers go? Because the partners of that firm, obviously, they're more sophisticated, more experienced, but they're not necessarily doing more sophisticated work. They're just experienced and sophisticated people who are doing commoditized work or managing commoditized work. So if that commoditized work gets eaten up by AI, what do the junior lawyers do? What are you training them to do? Are you going to train them to become partners? Well, the firm doesn't want 2,000 partners. It only wants 200 partners. Maybe even only wants 10 partners. I know, it's just a thought.
Yeah, so my quick reaction to that, Richard, would be, and I haven't thought this through in detail, but as you imagine the pyramid, I would imagine just the lowest block to be removed by the AI. And so, yes, that's fine. We democratize access to justice. Maybe it will be taken up by AI from within a law firm. Maybe it will be taken up by AI from outside of the law firm. But that's all fine. We just won't need to do certain types of legal tasks. And so they will just no longer be commoditized. And so, yeah, the pyramid will be smaller, but a fewer number of lawyers will be able to serve a larger group of clients, serve a much bigger unmet legal need. And I think so just looking at the overall numbers here in the UK regarding the statistics of how big a legal need there is, and how we see there is still a huge gap. Now, looking at the demographics, the population will grow. The population of solicitors does not grow as quickly. So my assumption here would be that actually there will be an increasing demand, which will, from an economic perspective, generate the overall turnaround will be just bigger. And so that will compensate for some of this loss of the lowest level block, but at the same time will increase access to justice. So that would be my hopeful thinking. But I think, yeah, that's what may happen.
Interesting. Megan, how do you see things panning out?
I 100% agree with everything that Václav is saying. One thing that I also think might be interesting is the ability to almost increase the mind space of even commoditized work. And what I mean by that is a lot of these tools, what they're offering is an alternative perspective. And an analog is, if you are a transactions lawyer, you might go to litigation to verify whether or not your clauses are actually as ironclad as you think they are, and that you're not inadvertently writing any risk, for example. With generative AI, you might be able to kind of aggregate multiple perspectives. So say it's an M&A deal, maybe that company that you're thinking of buying has some sort of sensitivity in potential pending litigation or some other areas. You might be able to preview all of those things in advance. Obviously, it's not the case for commoditized work. To Václav's point, I think we hope that actually with generative AI, there could be rising, access to justice, and then more complicated issues just get shifted up. But I think in general, most of the legal landscape, I think, is going to have much more input at every stage from different areas of expertise, as opposed to just, these single lanes that we've always operated on.
Yeah, definitely. We're just flicking through the questions there. There's a whole bunch of questions, and we've got like you've got, oh my god, we've only got 10 minutes left. So I can go through some of these very quickly. Megan, are you looking to commercialize your simulators? I think the answer is yes.
We have an open source version right now. There are going to be ones that we might license to other law schools. But yeah, I think if you are interested right now, you can kind of go on our website and just download the code and play around with it yourself.
Fantastic. Another good one, which we kind of touched on a bit. Will the big M&A law firms have to reduce their legal fees? My guess actually is that they can actually increase them. If you look at the long-term trends, total fees per matter just go up and up and up and up and up and up. I don't see the big law firms changing that. I think what's going to change is the internal structure, but I could be wrong. Jeffrey, are we going to see, is big law going to make less money?
Probably not. No,
Not
I
likely,
mean, no.
is it? I think they'll make even more money, but they'll just find a different way of doing it.
Is the billable hour going away? All right, what are you going to? No, billable hour is not going away.
I think it will go away, but I think they'll still make more money. But sorry, please go on.
No, but they will. They were very clear, the firms that I've talked to, that we, with the time we're saving, we're not just fumbling around. We're either taking on more clients and doing higher volume work, or we're just doing higher level work on those for those individual clients. So yeah, I'm not seeing that at all.
Or they do the old compensation rebalance, which is they just keep, as things fall away at the bottom, they just keep on increasing the fee rates at the top until eventually the clients go no more. In which case, as you say, they just expand on volume. They merge. They just bring in. They own more market share as much as they can ethically. But yeah, big law firms are filled with very clever people. I'm sure they're going to figure it out. What else can we? What have we got? See this kind of who are still the major universities by Jesse, who I'm saying about risk. Yeah, let's just recap that because we kind of skipped through it fairly quickly. If AI tools are making mistakes, or we suspect they might be, Vaclav, let's go to you on this. How do we handle that? How do we train the students, and how do we train the junior lawyers to deal with this? Because these tools are not perfect. Let's be honest. They're not perfect.
Okay, also from a theoretical viewpoint, obviously these tools are as perfect as they can be, and so you get what it is, right? But the key is to understand what it is that you are getting. And so I think the key to being able to verify the output properly is first having access to the right tool. So for example, and I'm not endorsing any products here, but there is a massive difference between ChatGPT or Copilot, so these generic AI tools that almost everyone, I believe, on this call would have access to, or let's say Leia, right, which is specifically for law designed Gen AI, even though built on the same large language model as I think ChatGPT is on the GPT-4o. And so if you have that specialized tool, there are already built-in ways how you can easily cross-verify with the source data and so on and so forth. And so that is part of the skill that the students or practitioners, junior lawyers will need to learn and just internalize as, okay, so this is something that I need to do because the way how the technology is construed makes it always possible that there will be some kind of hallucinated content. The way I tend to speak about this is that all of the content you see is hallucinated. It's just some of it happens to be correct. So I think that's the default mindset we should be having, and just being able to verify. And so, yeah, for me here, the distinction between those specialized for legal purpose tools and those generic tools. And so there is a big danger in lawyers using these general purpose tools. And we've seen those headline making cases in the US, in Canada, lawyers just submitting arguments, made up cases, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, I absolutely totally agree. I mean, some people might think that I'm just plugging legal tech as a sector, but as you go back to my original point, that an LLM can only know what it's been trained on. It cannot know how many days holiday you've got left because it doesn't have access to that database. And it's the same with legal stuff. It doesn't know how to really fine-tune review a particular way that your company handles or your law firm handles reviewing a particular kind of NDA. It just will not have that information. Which segues nicely to the point that you made, Vaclav, right at the beginning, which is how do you teach people to use these much better legal tech tools if you can't get a license or get free access? And actually, I'll go to Jeff first because you're at Lexis. Do you guys give free access to universities and things like that?
Not free access at the schools, but it's greatly reduced.
Mm-hmm.
We're not making money off of schools. Let's just make it as plain as that. The 200 plus accredited U.S. law schools all have access to Lexis Plus AI on their subscriptions.
Okay.
And they're just academic subscriptions. So yeah, they do have access. And as I said, most schools are just allowing usage of it, but they're teaching it, right? And they're making sure they understand how to use the thing before, they turn the students loose on it.
Okay, gotcha. Megan, from your, are there any tools that you've mentioned MacBook LM, which is Google, etc. Are there any legal tech tools that you thought, I really wish I could share with my friends at Stanford, but hey, I can't make everyone buy a license just so we can play with it. It's just, are there any tools where you're not getting out? You don't necessarily have to mention particular names, but are you finding that there are tools that you just can't get access to because you won't pay $50,000 for the license or whatever it is,
I think there certainly are legal tools that it's hard to get access to. And, obviously I won't name any names, but I think part of what we've been working on recently is, I mentioned earlier, this human machine benchmarking, or at least comparative performance. We've been trying to do that where we take a whole bunch of legal tech enterprise tools and we ask them to do legal work. So we've been working with DLA Piper and co-creating these tasks. And then we also ask 3 to 5 year associates, and we try to understand how they do the work. And then we're doing a blind evaluation with DLA senior partners. And the whole idea is going back to sort of the billable hour question, is we don't have a baseline even on what is quality legal performance. And I think that's the problem with sort of exposing questions of evaluation and being able to determine, how do you actually check your work, or how do you feel confident about using these tools? Well, we want to know, what do senior lawyers even care about when they're doing certain types of legal work? And so that's a lot of kind of what we think is the number of hours you spend on like any type of work product is not indicative of the value that it offers. And I think we need a better metric to showcase that. And until we have that, then, we're going to be arguing about the billable hour forever, so to speak. And so to me, I think like a lot of what this is showcasing and what this is actually teaching young lawyers, it's pointing a mirror to ourselves really, and showcasing what is the value of complexity in the legal space. And kind of down the line, how do these tools support us in getting to those points?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very good point about, what is lawyer performance? We're always, we're going on and on about AI does this, AI does that, but what does a lawyer do? And we just take it for granted. It's just, oh yeah, a lawyer, they do this, but we have very, very few actual objective measurements aside from it took me an hour to review that document. There's very little there. Coming to the end, so let's just end this on a sort of optimistic note. Do you think that AI and some of the things we've talked about already will actually help improve not just access to justice, but access to legal education? Because law schools, last time I checked, pretty expensive. Will it be easier to get that legal education now? Let's go quickly around Vaclav and then Megan. Vaclav, will it be cheaper because of these resources to get a legal education?
I think it will be cheaper to get access to some kind of legal education. My worry is just, what quality would it be? Because the role of a supervisor, a mentor, someone who coaches you along the way, and be it a university professor or your senior in a law firm, that is extremely important. And so that's what these tools cannot yet substitute.
Gotcha. Okay, we got 1 minute left. Okay, 30. Jeff, you got 30 seconds.
I'll be quick. I don't think it changes a thing, especially the way that the model is in the U.S. The model in the U.S. is really based on top schools and then lower level schools. And I think you're always going to need those individuals teaching. I mean, you need it. Yeah. So I think having the tool is great to get you to focus on more, but I don't think it's going to change much in that respect.
So you still need the brand name, you still need the professorial
Absolutely
expertise. Gotcha. And Megan, you get the last words.
100% agree. I think basically it's access to legal information. Whether or not you want to be a lawyer is a different thing.
Yeah, and that's an extremely good point because, and particularly, I don't know how much this is the case in the US, but in the UK, a lot of people do a first degree in law and they never become lawyers at all. In fact, they don't even go anywhere near the law. They go off and do something completely different. Yeah, very, very interesting. Well, we've probably raised more issues than we've answered, but we've answered a lot indeed and very, very well. So thank you very much to Megan Ma, Vaclav, and Jeffrey. I hope you've enjoyed the show. I believe that Lexis will probably be killing the feed now, but so please join us for the next LexisNexis webinar, which is all going to be about innovation teams, which is in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thanks all for the discussion, and thanks for sharing, Richard.
My pleasure. I don't even know if we're still live. Are we still live, guys?